Today, we're turning our attention to a really interesting recent book.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
It's Peter Carruthers' Human Motives, Hedonism, Altruism, and the Science of Affect. Just came out in 2024 from IRL Press at Oxford University Press.
Ah, Carruthers. Right. I've been meaning to look into that one. So what's the main goal here? What are we digging into?
Well, our mission, really, is to unpack the book's central argument. It's all about what fundamentally drives human actions.
Okay. And Carruthers' approach, if I recall, leans heavily on the science, doesn't it? Less on traditional philosophy.
He really grounds it in empirical findings, the science of affect, motivation studies. He consciously gives, less weight to arguments based purely on common sense or introspection.
Which makes sense. He argues pretty strongly, I think, that we need careful interpretation of scientific results, and we need to pull together findings from different areas to really get the picture.
Yeah, synthesis is key for him. And the big debate he tackles is motivational egoism and hedonism.
Right, the classic idea is that deep down we're only driven by self-interest, or specifically by seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
Are we all just looking out for number one, or just chasing good feelings?
And he doesn't really get into whether we should be like that, the normative side.
No, not directly. But he argues that figuring out if we are actually motivated that way, critiquing the motivational claims, is crucial. This sort of lays the groundwork for thinking about things like non-consequentialist morality, or whether genuine concern for others is even possible.
So if we're not just driven by self-interest or pleasure, then maybe altruism or duty can be real motivators.
That seems to be the implication. So the overarching thesis we're going to explore is basically this. The scientific understanding of effect actually shows that motivational egoism and hedonism are, well, false.
That's a strong claim. So where does he start? What's the foundation?
It all rests on the science of effect, the study of feelings, emotions, moods.
Okay. And within that, appraisal theory is pretty central, isn't it?
It is. Appraisal theory suggests our affective states, our feelings, come from how we evaluate the personal significance of things.
Things happening around us, or even thoughts or bodily states, right?
Right. Like you see or external stimulus, you appraise it as dangerous, significant to your survival, and boom, fear.
Or you feel hunger pangs, internal stimulus. You appraise that lack of energy as significant, and that drives, the feeling of hunger and motivation to eat.
Even moods, he suggests, might be like general appraisals of how many opportunities your environment seems to offer.
Okay. And these appraisal processes, they don't just create a feeling, they trigger outputs.
Several outputs, yeah. Behavior is a big one, both expressive, like facial expressions, and instrumental, like acting to change the situation. Then there's physiological arousal, heart rate, sweating, that sort of thing.
Right.
There's valence, the positive or negative quality of the feeling, and evaluative learning.
Let's take behavior first. The book talks about motor plans being activated automatically.
Yeah, based on the appraisal. Fear might trigger running or freezing, depending on the appraisal of the specific threat and context. It's often quite automatic.
And there's that concept, incentive salience.
Right, that's crucial. Like your bakery example earlier, the smell of bread. A positively valued stimulus just automatically grabs your attention, triggers approach behaviors, and feels good, feels desirable.
That pull towards something. It feels pleasurable just anticipating it or encountering it.
Exactly. It connects appraisal, valence, and action really tightly.
But what about habits? Things we do without really feeling much.
Good point. Carruthers notes that habits often start with effective feedback, doing something felt good, so you repeat it. But once the habit is formed, the cue itself can trigger the action directly.
So the feeling isn't necessarily involved at the moment of action anymore?
Often not, or not consciously. It can bypass conscious intention, which kind of clashes with how we usually think about our own actions, right? We tend to assume we intended everything we do.
We do. Okay, what about arousal, the physiological side?
Well, arousal itself can become valenced through learning. Think of thrill-seeking, like roller coasters. The rapid heartbeat, the quick breathing initially may be neutral or even negative, can become associated with the fun, the positive valence of the overall experience.
So you learn to enjoy the feeling of arousal in certain contexts, makes sense, and valence itself, the positive-negative core.
Valence is central. Positive valence is pleasure, negative is displeasure. Can be innate. We're wired to like sweet tastes, dislike bitter ones, or learned through association.
And this valence, it does more than just feel good or bad.
Oh yeah, it's key for predicting reward or punishment. It heavily influences our decisions.
This is where reward prediction error comes in.
That signal, often linked to dopamine activity, flags when an outcome is better or worse than expected. It's crucial for learning. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure itself, but also about motivation, the wanting part.
Okay, so let's clarify these terms. Value, valence, pleasure, displeasure, reward, punishment. How do they fit together in this model?
Right, so valence, the positive or negative feeling, acts as a kind of immediate ongoing signal of reward, if positive, or punishment, if negative. It can be about the present moment or anticipating the future.
And this signal does what?
It incentivizes behavior, approach the good, avoid the bad, and crucially, it updates our stored values based on the experience. That's the evaluative learning part.
So effective learning is how valence shapes our values over time.
And this isn't just about primary rewards like food or pain. We learn secondary rewards and punishers.
Things that become rewarding or punishing through association.
Yes, like maybe a certain jingle becomes pleasant because it was paired with getting a treat, or a specific place becomes unpleasant because something bad happened there. Classical conditioning plays a big role.
And these secondary things, they become valuable in themselves, not just predictors.
That's the idea. The jingle itself becomes pleasant, the place itself feels bad. And these cues can gain value independently of the original reward. Interestingly, people differ in how much these learned secondary rewards affect them.
The Garcia effect taste aversion, that's a powerful example of a secondary punisher, isn't it?
Absolutely. You eat something, get sick later for unrelated reasons, but boom, that taste becomes disgusting. Often happens with just one pairing, and you don't need to consciously figure out the link. It's a very strong automatic form of effective learning.
But it's not all bottom up from stimuli. Our thoughts matter too.
Definitely. Top-down influences are important. Beliefs, expectations, concepts, they can all shape our effective responses, our valence.
Like the placebo effect. Believing a sugar pill will help can actually make you feel better.
Or the nocebo effect, expecting side effects makes you more likely to experience them. Our minds actively shape our feelings.
And what about goals? Does achieving things feel good?
Yes. Making progress towards a goal you value is typically rewarding. Generates positive valence. Getting blocked or frustrated, that generates negative valence.
And we can intentionally try to manage these feelings.
We can. Strategies like reappraisal, rethinking the meaning of a situation to change how you feel about it, or self-affirmation, self-talk, those are all top-down ways we regulate affect.
Okay, so that lays out the science of affect. How does Carruthers connect this to decision-making and his critique of hedonism? He talks about a new hedonism.
Yeah, it builds directly on this affective science. A key idea is prospection, our ability to mentally simulate future events.
We imagine what might happen.
And we react emotionally to those simulations. Our effective response to the simulation acts as a predictor of how we'd feel if that event actually happened.
So considering options involves simulating them and seeing how each simulation feels?
That's the core idea. And often, these effective responses compete. The option that elicits the strongest positive valence or the least negative valence tends to win out. The relative ranking is key.
This sounds a bit like how neuroeconomics models decision-making, with values assigned to outcomes and effort.
It fits quite well. You can interpret those models hedonically. The valence signals the value of the outcome, maybe factoring in the anticipated cost or effort involved.
And Carruthers calls this the direct effect model.
Yes. The pleasure or displeasure from the simulation directly influences the choice. You don't necessarily need an explicit belief like, doing X will make me feel good later. The feeling now, in response to the simulation, does the work.
What about goals and intentions, though? Once I decide to do something, do I still need that effective push?
That's a nuance. Once a goal or intention is activated, it might create its own direct motor urge, a drive to act, without needing fresh, effective input right then. But, Carruthers argues, the valence, the effective response, was likely crucial in forming that intention in the first place.
So affect helps set the goal, even if it doesn't drive every single step towards it.
Plausibly, yes. And this ties into the limits of conscious reasoning and decisions.
Like those studies where people asked to list reasons for liking their partner actually made worse predictions about the relationship's future.
Compared to those who just went with their gut feeling, it suggests our affective system often encodes complex information that conscious deliberation can miss or even mess up.
So trusting your feelings can sometimes be better than overthinking.
In some situations, perhaps.
Yeah.
And when decisions are really tough, tons of options, or options that seem very close in value, we often fall back on heuristics, mental shortcuts.
And these shortcuts implicitly weigh the effort of thinking harder against the potential payoff.
Right. Our brains seem to automatically manage that cognitive load,
Mm.
even when options seem incomparable, like choosing between two very different careers.
Yeah. How does valence handle that?
Well, the limits of working memory might make it hard to fully simulate and compare everything about both options simultaneously. That difficulty in simulation could lead to the feeling of incomparability, which is still consistent with a valence-based choice process operating under constraints.
Okay. What about really big life-changing decisions? Transformative experiences like having a child. You can't really know what it will feel like beforehand.
Carruthers suggests that in those cases, our current values guide our effective responses to the imagined future scenarios. We simulate having a child based on what we value now.
Even though we know having the child will likely change those very values.
Yes. The decision is still driven by the valenced simulation, guided by current values, anticipating future effective states, however imperfectly.
So, summing up this new hedonism idea, most of our decisions are driven by valence, aiming for the best possible balance of positive over negative feelings, often without consciously thinking about future feelings.
That's a good summary of the model he builds. It's a form of hedonism, but grounded in these effective simulation mechanisms, not necessarily explicit beliefs about future pleasure.
Okay, but then he moves on to critique traditional hedonism, right, and introduces this value-representing idea.
He does. He acknowledges the standard objections cases of apparent self-sacrifice, things that don't look like pleasure-seeking.
And the evolutionary argument that pure hedonism might make altruism unstable. If helping others only happens because you believe it will make you feel good, that seems fragile compared to a direct, innate motivation to help.
Right. Evolution might favor more direct pro-social motives. And Carruthers suggests reinterpreting some counterexamples, like impulsive heroism. Maybe that's not a calculated decision, but an intense, effect-driven motor urge based on deeply held values. The value "save the child" triggers an immediate, powerful, effective response and action tendency.
What about the experience machine? Nozick's thought experiment. Wouldn't a hedonist jump in?
Carruthers argues our reluctance actually fits. We value things other than just feeling good, real achievements, genuine relationships. The prospect of plugging in gets appraised negatively because it means losing those things we value. The negative valence comes from appraising the loss of real-world value.
Okay. That's a way to frame it. And the experiments on empathy and helping, do they refute this new hedonism?
They challenge certain interpretations of hedonism. For instance, the idea that we only help to get the warm glow or empathic joy afterwards. Experiments suggest that's not the whole story.
Or the idea that we only help to stop feeling bad ourselves about seeing someone suffer, the negative state relief model.
Right. Evidence suggests that while that might play a role sometimes, genuine empathic concern for the other person also seems to be a motivator, not fully reducible to relieving our own distress or seeking future pride.
So this leads him to propose an alternative to thinking of pleasure-displeasure as just raw feelings that motivate us, the value representing account.
Instead of the feeling itself being the motivator, this view says pleasure represents an outcome as good and displeasure represents it as bad.
Like a non-conceptual tag saying good or bad.
Kind of. These representations of value then influence choice. It shifts the focus from the raw feeling to what the feeling signals or stands for.
Does he argue even the raw feelings are representations?
He suggests that's likely the case, fitting within broader representational theories of mind. But then there's the philosophical hiccup. Is value a natural scientific property?
The is-ought gap, or fitting value into a scientific worldview. How does he handle that?
He ultimately suggests these representations are about adaptive value, what was conducive to survival and reproduction for our ancestors. Okay, so the value being represented is, in evolutionary terms, fitness-related value.
Right. This account gains traction because it aligns well with representational theories of consciousness. If other mental states are representations, maybe valences too.
It fits feelings into that broader picture.
And naturalistic theories of representation often talk about information being used by downstream systems. Valence carries information about adaptive value, disvalue, and the learning systems using that information are adaptive.
So the whole system makes evolutionary sense.
It allows for the possibility of erroneous feelings too. If valence represents adaptive value, it can sometimes get it wrong, just like our perception can be fooled by illusions.
That feels a bit strange, doesn't it? Saying a pleasure could be incorrect. I usually think feelings just are.
It does clash with intuition, but it parallels the philosophical idea that emotions can fit or misfit their object. Like, is your level of anger appropriate to the situation? Here, the valence component itself represents the target as adaptively good or bad.
So the positive-negative feeling is a non-conceptual representation of goodness-badness in an adaptive sense.
Yes. And to handle the counterintuitiveness of incorrect pleasure, he uses a distinction common in philosophy of mind: the difference between a signal's correctness condition and its mode of presentation.
Okay, break that down.
The correctness condition is what makes the signal accurate in an objective sense. For valence, Carruthers argues, that's adaptive value or disvalue. That's the scientific explanation level.
But how we experience it.
That's the mode of presentation. We experience valence as a raw, non-conceptual sense of goodness or badness, not as a thought about adaptive fitness.
I see. So scientifically it tracks adaptive value, but subjectively it just feels good or bad.
And this value-representing view, or evaluativism, is contrasted with another theory: imperativism.
Right. What does imperativism say?
It says pleasure and displeasure aren't evaluations, this is good, bad, but commands more of this or less of this, non-specific motor urges.
How does Carruthers argue against that?
One key point is the dissociation between liking and wanting. Liking is the pleasure you feel during consumption, like savoring food. Wanting is the drive towards it beforehand, the incentive salience.
And liking seems more like an evaluation.
Plausibly, yes. It feels like an assessment of the current experience. This is good. Imperativism struggles to explain this consummatory pleasure as just a command, and if liking is evaluative, then for unified theory, anticipatory pleasure should probably be evaluative too.
What about brain evidence?
Neural studies seem to separate the brain areas involved in valence, feeling good, bad, from those primarily driving motor commands, which poses a challenge for imperativism's claim that valence is a motor urge. Carruthers discusses this and other objections to evaluativism, arguing his view holds up better.
Okay, so assuming this value-representing view, how does it apply to things like altruism and morality?
It connects back to the evolutionary picture. Altruism likely evolved through mechanisms like kin selection, helping relatives share genes, and reciprocal altruism, helping those who help you. Gene-culture coevolution probably shaped innate pro-social tendencies too.
We see signs of this early on.
Seems so. Infant studies show preferences for characters who help others over those who hinder them. There's evidence for early pro-social behavior.
What about fairness? Is that innate?
The book discusses this. Some primate studies suggest what looks like fairness might sometimes be simpler: inequity aversion, reacting negatively to getting less than someone else rather than caring about fairness in the abstract.
But infant studies do show preferences for fair distributors.
Yes, there's research suggesting infants prefer individuals who share resources equally. It's complex, and interpretation is key. The book also covers social group cognition, how we categorize people into us and them, often favoring our own group.
And norm psychology, following rules.
Carruthers suggests an evolutionary basis for internalizing group norms, perhaps driven by things like avoiding punishment from others, third-party punishment, and the general benefits of group cohesion. He does caution about interpreting some infant studies, especially those relying only on looking time, as definitive proof of complex moral judgments.
So the overall picture for morality is innate predispositions interacting with culture and learning.
Yes, innate tendencies shaped by evolution, perhaps involving valence representing adaptive value related to social living, get tuned and elaborated through cultural learning and individual experience, all mediated by these effective learning mechanisms.
Those valence represents adaptive value, disvalue,
Yeah.
correctness condition. But we experience it as simple, good, bad mode of presentation.
Exactly. And this ties back to that idea of extended egoism. Maybe at the ultimate evolutionary level, our choices maximize inclusive fitness, but subjectively, consciously, we're just pursuing what feels good and avoiding what feels bad, where those feelings are our internal representations of what's adaptively valuable.
So, to wrap up, Carruthers' main argument is that the science of affect points away from simple egoism or hedonism. Instead, motivation is driven by valence, which represents adaptive value.
Right. We feel pleasure and displeasure, but these function as non-conceptual signals of goodness and badness, guiding us towards what evolution has, in a sense, tagged as valuable for survival and reproduction.
It definitely reframes things. It's not just about chasing a subjective feeling, but about being guided by a system that represents deeper adaptive values.
It certainly gives you a different lens through which to view your own motivations and decisions. What really drives us, is it the feeling itself or what the feeling represents?
A provocative thought indeed. It suggests our feelings are perhaps smarter, or at least have a deeper rationale than we often give them credit for. It makes you think about the interplay of affect, value, and behavior in a new light.